Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Imagine writing a letter to one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, and then the phone rings. On the other end of the line is Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, the man convicted of murdering 49 women. That's exactly what happened to journalist Maria DiLorenzo. But what makes this story even stranger is what Ridgway started telling her. During their phone calls from prison, he claimed there were more victims, bodies that have never been officially connected to him. At one point, he even told her about a box of evidence that he buried in a park, and Maria actually went to look for it. Tonight, we're diving into the book, Confessions of the Green River Killer, and the bizarre, disturbing conversations she had with one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Maria, this book's about Gary Ridgway, famous serial killer. What I found unique about it is how you got in contact with Gary and this whole, I'll say, weird relationship between the two of you. I don't think that many people get to that level where maybe you're getting a letter or two, maybe you get a response. Most people get ignored, but you've had years of conversations and phone calls to the point that he's calling you daily.
Yeah, there was a point in our correspondence where he was calling me every day for a good while. Yeah.
Let's start out with how this kind of started. I know in your book, you said that this started during COVID when you wrote Gary a letter. Were you expecting a response? And is this something that you've done with other serial killers before?
Well, not necessarily serial killers, but at that point I had been writing true crime. I had covered a story that happened in 2011 in New York. It was a spree killer. His name was Maxim Gelman. And he killed 4 people in New York City and then injured 5 others. And that was kind of the beginning for me, I guess you could say. I had just finished graduate school and this story happened, and it happened so close to where I grew up in Brooklyn that I couldn't get it out of my head. And it was such, like a random, he had killed 4 people. They were not connected. It was his stepfather. It was an ex-girlfriend, her mother. He ran over just, random person while trying to get away. And, it ended with him getting arrested on the subway. He tried to hijack a train, stab someone, and it was almost like something out of GTA, right? Grand Theft Auto. And so that was kind of the beginning for me. I ended up, after months, contemplating, what should I do? Should I contact him? And I felt there was a story there to tell. So I ended up interviewing him on Rikers Island, probably a year after the case had happened. And then I was doing that for a few years. And I did write a book. It sadly was not published, but after that, I kind of felt like I had a knack for navigating the prison system, for one thing, and then just talking to people who are incarcerated and getting them to really kind of open up in a way. And, I approach a story with any story and any person with an open mind. I'm not there to judge them. So I figured during COVID, I had so much extra time, like many of us did. And I ended up starting a website called Beyond the Crime. And I sent out a bunch of letters to just really anybody that I could think of who I thought was interesting or might have something interesting to say. And Gary was at the top of my list just because his case I always found interesting, and the fact that he doesn't really talk to people. especially media. And, so I figured why not try? I wasn't necessarily expecting a response. When I sent out that letter, in the back of my mind, like I kind of felt like I'm meant to do something with this, but that was just my own intuition. And, sometimes that's just not accurate. But, I honestly was not, the logical side of me interfered and, pretty much I was not expecting a response from him. But sure enough, I sent out the letter, and then 3 weeks later, he ended up calling.
You know what I find laughable about that in your book is that, because I was kind of picturing this myself, of you've got someone that may call, and if they call, it's not like they can send you a text and plan this time.
Right.
You're doing your laundry and actually had a pair of socks in your hand.
Yeah.
When Gary calls. What was that feeling like? What was going through your head when you hear the operator or the computer on the phone?
I was kind of shocked at first, like, to be honest. Yeah, I was really shocked. I saw the number come up. It was, Walla Walla, Washington. And in my head, like, it didn't even register at first to me, like, oh, this is him actually calling. And once I heard the operator and, I heard the mumble, because they say their names when they call. And I thought I heard Gary. I said, no, that can't be. Right. And like, it was just hard to believe. And then, he was just like, hey, it's Gary. And like, I was like, Ridgway, like the Green River Killer. And so it started there. And yeah, I was literally folding laundry. It was a Sunday night. I was getting ready for work the next day. So completely random, out of nowhere almost.
And so Gary wants to talk about the victims that are considered missing persons. So I believe that he was convicted of, is it 39 or 40, somewhere around that range?
It was 49.
49. Okay.
49. Yeah.
49 people. But obviously he's killed more. That's a question that I've always asked of a lot of serial killers, is what's their real number? Because police are going to initially charge them with enough to keep them in jail. But from my understanding, he ended up pleading guilty eventually after the murder stacked up to avoid the death penalty.
Right. They gave him a plea deal.
Right. Which creates an issue because you've got a plea deal. Now he doesn't have to talk anymore. And you've got other victims that are out there. Bodies have not been recovered. And so he poses this idea to you of doing this research to find out about these other people, right?
Yeah, that was how I initially began my correspondence with him. He had reached out to me telling me that he was responsible for killing more women, and he wanted my help basically to try and prove it. And he had told me that there were probably 32 to 42 more, which would bring his number into the 80s, 90 range, which is hard to even fathom, right? And, and I also question, like, did he even know, right? Does he even have like the exact number somewhere?
I thought about that too, because I don't want to give away everything in the book. Again, it is Confessions of the Green River Killer. You can get that anywhere a book is sold once it comes out on July 21st. But that's one of the things that he wanted you to do, is to actually give you the dates of when they went missing, because I believe that he did a lot of his murders on weekends.
So he said, right. But that's not even true, because if you look at all of the cases, they weren't all on weekends, right? The date of disappearances. But he claims that, the weekend was primarily, which may or may not be true. According to him, right?
That's one of the things that you address too, how he created this habit of leaving work early, especially during his prime time of killing, where he would leave work and then find a prostitute before work, right?
It would be before work. He wouldn't even like be at work yet. He would actually leave earlier than he had to in the morning. This was later on. This is when he was married, his third marriage. And he would leave earlier than he needed to. And he would try to find a woman in the morning. And then sometimes on the way home from work, he would try, but at that point it was hard because he was expected to be home by a certain time. And, he had the obligation of like marriage, right? And, by being so consistent, that was how he really, she didn't suspect him, right? Or ignored red flags, I guess you could say. But, as long as he was consistent in his routine and came home every day when he was supposed to, she really had nothing to question, I guess, in reality, right? So, he was good with that, and even, nights that he would have union meetings, those would really be nights when he would go find a woman. But, a lot of those times too, he wouldn't always kill them. Right. So it really depended on his mood. It depended on how much time he had. Right. So like these were all other factors that, to consider, because there were a lot of women that he just had sex with and did not kill. He even had regulars, which, I mentioned that in my book. Women that he would see for years, right, on, a regular basis and have sex with them, but not kill them. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. Another question I had about this initial contact, did you question his motives for why he was asking you to find out about these missing women or other victims?
Yeah. I mean, he always tried to present himself as like, oh, he's not that bad of a guy, right? And he wanted me to, I think, trust him and let my guard down. So he would try to spin it that, oh, he just wanted to give closure to the families. And, he was trying to do the right thing, right, at this point in his life, which, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think even though he'll say notoriety isn't important to him and, he doesn't like the attention, but on some level, I think he does. And I think, this might have been his way. He wanted to maybe stay relevant, or he wanted, to have the highest number, right? And be, the best serial killer, right? In the country. So I think all of that stuff, he'll say it doesn't matter to him, but I think it does, I think he is narcissistic deep down. So.
Well, let's dig into how Gary became who he is today. And you talked about his childhood and where he grew up. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So he did live in Seattle, Washington from he was 10 years old on. So do you want to know like the early stuff or from that point?
Well, what I would love to talk briefly about, again, we're not going to go through every detail in the book, but in the book, you talked about his abusive relationship with his mother and how he wet the bed, and the punishment would be that she would stick him in the shower, right, in a very cold shower.
Cold bath, yeah.
Yes. And there were other incidents like that in his early childhood. Right?
Yeah, which, I mean, you have to consider the time period too. I mean, he was born in 1949. So we're talking, throughout the 50s, early 60s. And I think what we would consider child abuse today, back then, I feel like they would just think, oh, like they're giving a kid a punishment, right? So, even the way that, because he was also dyslexic, and that was not treated the way it should have been, right? And again, it's the time period. I think if all of this stuff was happening today, it would have been very different. So his mother especially would get very frustrated with him when she would try to read with him and try to help him with school, and would end up getting frustrated because he couldn't retain information and he didn't read well. And, why can't you be like your brother? Right. Like that sort of stuff. And she would kind of belittle him. And, it got to a point he was, terrified to read in front of his classmates. At that point in his life, he was a young kid. He just wanted to, and these were his words from, his interrogation. He said he just wanted to disappear. He didn't even want to exist, right? So there was, obviously a lot of childhood trauma in his life. And then also the bedwetting, right? And then what his mother would do, right? Make him parade naked down the hall and then go take a cold bath, right? But it's interesting because he never came out and said, oh, this was abusive to me. He'll just like retell these were incidents of his childhood. So that in itself is interesting too, which again, I think it was the time period. So
you also mentioned in your book about when he stabbed a kid. Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah. So he was he was a teenager. He was young, Gary, and he found this 6-year-old boy playing a game outside. He was just outside playing, and Gary had a knife on him, and he ended up telling the kid that, people are after him. You have to go lay down in the grass, go hide yourself, I'll come with you, right? Almost acting like he's like protecting him, and then lays down beside him and then stabs him in his side, like on his stomach. And the young boy, he didn't die, but he was severely injured. He had to spend, I don't know, however long in the hospital, and Gary was never caught for that. He walked away, and no one ever knew that he had done that until years later, when he's finally arrested for these crimes, and it came up, right? These early incidents of violence. So, he had gotten away with that. And, it seemed like almost everything that he was doing during those times, he was getting away with. Or if he did get caught doing something, like there was an incident with his younger cousin that's also in the book, that he almost just got, slap on the wrist for it. And then that was it, so.
What, the touching part?
Yeah.
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 So, and that kind of leads me to this kind of next phase in his life where he eventually does get married.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And during that marriage, sex is very important to Gary. Gary wants it all the time, consistent. And I'm talking about multiple times a day, mm-hmm. where if he's from his early adulthood until when he's caught, this is occurring. But I wanted to talk about with his first wife. He starts to exhibit or is interested in choking and other forms of bondage, right?
That was actually his second wife. His first wife, and he told me this, he said that they were not even intimate many times because he was away through most of that marriage.
That's right.
Yeah. His first marriage, they were high school sweethearts. It was him and this woman, Claudia, and they ended up getting married, but, he was shipped off. He was, in the Vietnam War, he was shipped off, and, he was in the Philippines and Vietnam. Right. He was in all these different places. So, I believe his first tour was about 6 months. So 6 months out of that time, he was away. And, so he was cheating on her in the Philippines. That's when he had first started going to prostitutes. It was during that time.
Do you think just because that was the norm and it was so easy in the Philippines?
Yeah, that's how he described it to me. He said, the second that they would walk off the ship, right? Like women would be there waiting for them. And, someone like, and I don't even think it's someone like him per se. I think it was like probably most of the men there, right? That they were young. I mean, he was only 20, 21, right? He was really young. And, these women are throwing themselves at you. I feel like, yeah, you're probably like, it's almost like common sense, right? I feel like a lot of guys would be interested in that.
And you even talked about it in the book, how it was so normal that the woman would kick him out, make sure that they would get on the ship in time.
Yeah. And he said, yeah, they knew what time that the men had to be back at their ships, and they would be like, okay, you have to go now. You have to go to work. And he would go back on the ship and work his day. And then by the time 5 o'clock came around, they're back at the bars. And then, these women, they negotiate prices with them. And I think he said he paid maybe $5-10 and to spend at night. And it's not just like an hour, it's like the whole night. And he described it kind of like these little shack homes where they would go. And and he didn't look at it as cheating. Like there's a double standard. He was like, well, I was away, I was at war, I was in the Navy, right? And so he didn't really consider it cheating. But when she did it to him, right, because that's what he came home to, was he didn't walk in on it, but over time, he had learned that, she was involved with another man and met somebody when he was away. And, he told me that was like the moment in his life where all hell broke loose, basically, for him. He couldn't deal with that rejection.
So he leaves her, and then he eventually gets remarried. Yes. And with wife number 2, that's when the sexual deviance starts to occur.
Yeah. So, and these were things he claims he was introduced to in the Philippines. He saw a lot of stuff there in Singapore, where I think that's where a lot of the curiosity stemmed from. And then when he came back, right, to the United States, he had these ideas kind of, brewing in the back of his mind. And then even when his first wife, when that ended, he had started seeing prostitutes in America then, because he had become so accustomed in the Philippines, right? So he started to do the same thing here. But then, he also had a lot of girlfriends. He was part of this dating service, which I guess would be the Tinder of that time, right? And, so he was always joining these dating services, even after his second divorce, when he was a single father. He was part of Parents Without Partners, and he met all of these women. And, he had at one point, 3 girlfriends at one time. Right. So.
And that's another thing that's odd, is he doesn't have trouble meeting women.
No.
But yet he's going to these prostitutes consistently. Right. And not to judge them, but if you're a guy and you've got the option of having sex with someone that does not have or is less likely to have an STD and not a nasty prostitute, no offense to them, but I just look at my years of being in law enforcement and just seeing some of the women that we had to deal with, and they're not bathing. This is not Pretty Woman or some high class prostitute in Vegas. I'm talking about the ones that are homeless and being really taken advantage and marginalized as people. He's going to them and going to a nasty hotel to do this in.
Well, yeah. I mean, when he was actually killing, because he claims he never killed in a motel. That would have been, according to him, asking for trouble, right? So, but yeah, I mean, he would have motel dates sometimes, and he was doing all of it was just constantly just looking for women. But I think with them, with women in the sex industry, they were just easier targets. I think, and I thought about this for a long, long time, and, based off of just things that he would say to me, and, just these very violent, right, at times, fantasies they, kind of he would describe. And I think if he had the opportunity to kill any woman, I think he probably would. I think it was just a matter of, if he started killing other women who were not part of that industry, then obviously he's going to become a suspect, right? So it was just the fact that they were vulnerable and they were easier targets for him. And he even told me himself that, he knew that nobody was going to miss them, or no one was going to look for them as hard as if he was doing this to, just a random person.
So do you think this, this blend of violence and sex, does he differentiate the two for the most part between his regular partners and prostitutes? I know that second wife sounds like he doesn't, right? Third wife, it sounds like he has more of a traditional relationship.
Yeah, I think his wives were really just like there for impulse control, almost like they helped him control his impulses in a way. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't thinking about it. He later, confessed to police that there were times when, he was having sex with his third wife and had thought about killing her. The idea occurred to him, and, he had to really work hard to stop himself from doing that. So, and then there were girlfriends too. I mean, there was one girlfriend that, he put stakes in the ground in the woods and tied her up. And, so there were instances of that, and, just, stuff that he wanted to experiment, and was just kind of, well, who was willing to do that? And if he found someone willing to do that, then sure, it wasn't just, women that he was picking up from the street.
In your conversations with him, do you think that it excited him more to kill, or was it the process? Because you talked about in the book, you said that, not to be graphic, but he would finish and then he would kill them.
According to him, yeah. I mean,
some people would kill them and then the necrophilia would be part of it, right? What was it with him?
According to him, I mean, a lot of the time he claims he would finish and then he would strangle them right after that. So it was always from behind, so they wouldn't even see it coming. He would choke them. He would put them in a chokehold.
Yeah, and you actually talked about how he learned how essentially to do it better, right? How he'd wrap his legs around them.
Mm-hmm. He started, I mean, when he first started doing this, he was, doing it with his hands and he was facing them. And then he realized that they could scratch him and they could fight him off that way easier. So then he started to, from behind, right? That was always his method, because then he could put them in a chokehold with his arm and he could wrap his legs around them. And, and it escalated. I mean, in the beginning, when he first started really doing this in the early 80s, and I mean, it could even be the 70s. I mean, it's really hard to say with him, because he would hint at, there were things that he did in the 70s, but he wouldn't be specific enough, right, to really pinpoint anything. But it escalated. It started out where he would choke them unconscious, and he was not trying to kill them necessarily. And then later on, he started to kill them. And then that became the regular, almost like, habit for him. And then the necrophilia, then that started later down the line. So
speaking of habits, you get to some point, and I'm going to say relationship, but I don't mean it in any type of negative way, but it gets to the point where he's calling you every day. And at one point he even says, "I love you." And then hung up the phone.
Yeah.
Tell me about that experience when he tells you, I love you.
He just started saying it one day out of nowhere. It was bizarre. I mean, here I am, I was not giving any sort of, hint at like anything like that.
I'll throw this in. He also at one point starts to give you sex advice, right?
Oh yeah, that was like
your future husband, right?
Yeah, he would do a lot of that. Like, this is what you need to do, and it would get really weird. And yeah. So, I mean, yeah, he started to just like one day tell me, oh, he loves me, and didn't give me the chance to respond. He said it at the end of the call, and I was like, wait, I was like, oh no, this is not good. Right. And he continued to say it. I never said it back to him. And
say thank you, or like what?
I would just say, oh, just kind of, giggle awkwardly. Oh, and I think a couple times I did say thank you, and then there was one time.
Most people don't even get a response.
Yeah, I mean,
serial killers
never
let
said
alone
it.
a phone call. And you're getting phone calls every single day.
Yeah,
and at some point, I'm sure that you're realizing this is going to be a really good book.
At the time, I didn't really know what kind of book I was writing. I mean, I thought it was going to be more about like the unsolved cases. Like that was my main goal with him. And then it kind of veered into all different directions. And, it kind of got to the point where like he had to be in control of what we talked about. Otherwise, like, he wasn't going to talk to me. And he kind of made that clear, and it was kind of like, okay, let me just like build this rapport with him and just see what I can get out of every conversation I have, even if, we're not focusing on all the things that I want to be focusing on. There's just no other way with him, because he had nothing
to read. Right.
Yeah. I mean, because I had nothing to offer him other than I'm just, someone else on the other end, and I'm listening to him and I'm not judging him. But in terms of like, there are some instances where it's like, okay, like, like when all of this first happened, he confessed to avoid the death penalty. Right. Like, his case, it had already been solved. He'd already been convicted. He was serving 49 life sentences. There was no chance of him ever getting out. Right. So, and also commissary, like I had nothing to offer to him. He could barely have anything to begin with. And then like, his family took care of him. So it's not like he needed money. It's not like he needed a TV. It's not like he needed anything that I could really provide to him. So it was kind of like, well, he enjoyed talking to me for whatever reason. I think it was because I would let him lead, and I was not, just constantly asking him questions. Like the questions would kind of happen organically, right? Based off of like what he chose to talk about. And, he kind of told me early on that, he didn't like the idea of the media. And he felt that they were always asking him these questions, and it really bothered him. And no one ever wanted to get to know him in a real way, right? So I said, well, I'm here to listen, whatever you want to tell me, right? And he couldn't believe it after. He said, oh, really? And I said, yeah, tell me. And he said, well, I've done good things too. And I said, well, tell me what good have you done? I'm curious to know. And so then he started telling me about this story where he assisted and this girl, he had witnessed her get hit by a car, and he ran out to help. And, that was like his good deed. And, he went into the story. Yeah. Right. And, I think that was part of like, he wanted me to see him as a person, not just a serial killer. And, I think on some level, maybe, I don't know if it was like loneliness or it was entirely manipulative, right? It's hard to say, where, he was just trying to get me to get my guard down so maybe I could trust him. And I really don't know what his end goal was, but I knew that if I was going to get anywhere with him, I had to let him lead the discussions, because he was so controlling and, basically told me in so many words, like, he probably would not have like called me anymore if I continued to ask, right, all of the questions that I wanted to. So Yeah.
I find it really interesting that they've said he's got a low IQ and that
Mm.
he has these issues, but he's very good at manipulating people.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. He's master manipulator.
And yeah, I think that that would be hard from your standpoint of knowing that he's trying to manipulate you, but you don't have a lot of cards in this, right?
Mm.
Uh, you
And I
talk,
mean, it ended up that he ended up getting sick, right? And which no one saw that coming. I had no expectation of that occurring when it did, and I'm sure he didn't either. And it just so happened. I mean, that's the thing that made us no longer communicate. So at that point, it was kind of like, well, what do I do? Right? Like my main source just, that was it, just ended
right.
communication in this very abrupt way. And I had to make the decision, do I write a different kind of book? And, that's when I started to really reflect on my experience and what I had endured those 2 years communicating with him. And I felt that there was value to that story, just to kind of give an idea of like what it's really like to engage and interact with a serial killer. And someone, especially like him, who's like, he's like one of the worst of the worst. Right. So,
Well, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and you've probably interacted with him more than law enforcement at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I think that he's probably going to shut down on a lot of those interviews until they offered him the deal. But even then, they knew that there are more victims out there. And I know that you mentioned this in your book again, is that they knew that there's more victims out there, but yet they're more or less satisfied with the 49 and knew he wasn't going anywhere and didn't want the PR to be bad, because admitting that there's possibly even 100, who knows what the real number is out there, that's not going to look very good in the public's eye.
No. And that really angers me, that, one of them said, the list was politically motivated to stay at 49. And it's like, okay, well, what about the others, right? And he even questioned them too. And that was, one of the things that he told me during our very first, maybe it wasn't the first phone call, but it was early on in my correspondence with him, that, he had told them that there were more, and no one seemed to want to do anything about it. And so that's when I went down the rabbit hole, right? And I started to really look at these cases. I found there was a long list that I compiled of, it was like 70, 80, which I don't think he's responsible for all of those, but it was just like during that time period, and women who had, possibly been runaways or involved in some type of sex work where it's possible. But, in a lot of those cases, their remains had never been found. But there were 2 cases, and I mentioned these in my book, Nicole French and Sarah Habakangas, where their remains were found. And these cases happened during the 1990s. It was 91 and 92. And both of their bodies, the murders happened a year apart. And both of them were found in North Bend, Washington, in that area, only a few miles from where he left other victims. Right. So that, to me, that raised, light went off in my head, like, oh, okay, like he has to be responsible for these. Right. So, I went down, further down the rabbit hole, and I eventually got the full interrogation of when he confessed. Right. And it was over 8,500 pages, so 8,000 pages, over 8,000 pages, which at first they were just giving me like like installments, they were calling it. So I was not seeing this document in full. It wasn't until, that actually someone in the prosecutor's office said, because I kept calling and asking about this case, these two cases. And eventually somebody said, hey, like, I'll just give you the, the full report. Just look and see when these names come up. And it's interesting because, especially with Nicole French, because during his interrogation, he does admit to killing her, and then he takes it back, and then he admits it, and then he takes it back, right? So it's a lot of that, but that's not uncommon for him. Like, he's done that in other cases. And, there were just so many details that made me question, like there has to be something, to this. Just, she was found strangled. She was, a prostitute. The last place where she was seen was actually on a corner where several of his other victims had gone missing, right? So like all of these things factor into, it makes me think it's him. And one of the things that the police had said that made this one stand out and, it's probably not him, which doesn't make sense to me, but because there were indications that she had been tied up with rope, right? But, according to them, he didn't do this in any other case, but he has a history of tying up girlfriends and wives, so it
Right.
didn't. And then the rope that they found a piece of rope in the crime scene. Apparently it was the same type of rope he had in his car, in his truck. So he said, well, I don't remember it, but maybe I did start tying them up, right? So he never gave like a clear answer about that. But later on, I talked to the medical examiner, and he said there was not a doubt in his mind. Like, he believed it was a Green River case because it was so similar to all the others. And when I contacted King County Sheriff's Office, and they did not want to talk to me, right? These detectives, the present ones now, they did not want to talk to me. They kept telling me it's an ongoing active case, right? And I even had Othram, right, the company that they retest DNA and everything. They said, if there's any evidence you have on file, right? Because that was something that the medical examiner confirmed with me. He said, well, on one of the victims, Nicole French had a pair of, it was pants tied around her neck that was used as a ligature. And that was something that Gary did in other cases. And with Wendy Caulfield, right, that was one of the first Green River cases. And he would sometimes leave ligatures wrapped around, right? So that was another indication that I thought, well, this sounds like something he would do. And the medical examiner confirmed with me that, they would be able, if that evidence is still on file as it should be, right? If nothing, happens to make that evidence disappear, and if it's still there, he confirmed that it could still be retested. And it could possibly, just because there have been so many advancements, right, since the 90s. Right. And they claim, we don't need help. We don't need Othram to do anything for us. So I don't know. I really don't know why they did not, take them up on their offer, why they won't retest evidence. It's one of the most frustrating things, because that's the brick wall that I kept running into, where they did not want to talk to me. They did not want to mention nothing about those cases. It was just complete silence on their end.
Do you think they don't want to use the resources to continue down this path? Because if they start to investigate that case and they know that there's others, there's going to be more public pressure to go after, to spend more time on these other missing persons. And that he's never getting out.
Right.
He's gotten charged for 49. So is it a resources thing? Is it because it's the population that he victimizes, which is frequent with serial killers?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know if it's they're just lacking manpower, perhaps, or they're lacking resources. But, that seems logical for a point. But then when they bring him back to Seattle, right? So in 2024, they brought Gary back to Seattle, regardless of his poor health. I mean, at this point, he's in a wheelchair. He's barely functional, right? But they still brought him back to Seattle to supposedly look for bodies, which I don't really know what the point of that trip was.
Do you think that was like a dog and pony show, or do you think that
it's all like I don't records? They wouldn't share their scene notes with me. They kept saying it's
I said good for you.
Yeah, and I had a public records lawyer who, I mean, this man was just so kind, just giving me advice because he knew it was, I was just trying to do a good thing. And he had advised me, he said, you know what, tell them that you're going to seek legal action, and maybe that will get them a little bit like nervous or stirred up that they will maybe speak with you. All I know is I sent out that email, and I called the superintendent of the prison, and I tried to plead with him like, hey, let me get in to speak with Gary because, I was able to build this rapport with him, and, I explained the whole thing. Right. And I just wanted to get answers, or try to get answers, right, on these cases. And he said no. He said no. He's in this medical unit, and he said the only way he would ever let me go at this point would be if law enforcement accompanied me. And I said, well, that's not going to happen, right? So, but literally the day after that, I later found out, the day after my phone call with the superintendent, in order to move him was then put in place. And by, September 9th? So that was the end of August, September 9th, they had him back in Seattle. So at that point, right, if I had brought them to court, they would have been able to say, look, we're investigating. Because that would have been the thing in court. Like, they would have had to prove to a judge that they're actively investigating these cases after 30 plus years. And otherwise, the lawyer was confident that I probably would have been successful in getting them to give me their records because, they probably would not have been able to prove they were actively investigating. But then this happened, and it was like, well, there goes that, I can't, I had not a leg to stand on at that point.
And that's such a hard call because you're right. It's so easy for them to say, oh, well, it's an active investigation. And when we were writing our book about a 1973 murder, I'll give myself a plug, A Murder on Campus, a professor, the cop in North Carolina's most notorious cold case. It's about the murder of Virginia Olsen on the campus of UNC Asheville. And it was the same thing of they're telling us it's an active investigation, even though both the suspects were dead, a lot of the witnesses were dead, and they had lost a lot of records. We ended up having to find them. And so I understand your pain of wanting to find answers, wanting to bring closure to families, especially ones that are just completely forgotten. Mm-hmm. And if it's not for people like you bringing these cases attention, then they get lost in time.
Right. Exactly. And that's the most heartbreaking thing, is, okay, this happened in 91, 92, but, the families are still hurting, Right. I got to speak to Sarah's brother, and I got to speak to Nicole's mother, and they still carry this pain with them to this day. Like, it doesn't go away. And, just the fact alone that, I have a medical examiner telling me they could retest evidence. Like, why are they not doing that?
And what bangs my head on the wall about all this is you've got Othram, that's, if not the best, one of the best labs in the world, and they're saying they're on board.
Yeah. They had said we offered to them, and they said, oh, we don't need any help at this time. So I don't know, is the evidence not on file? Did something happen to that ligature? Did they somehow maybe retest the evidence already? And but why not just say that? Right. So there's just so many questions. And I hate to think that they, really maybe they have, I don't know, they're not doing what they should be doing. I hate to, think that, but at the end of the day, like, what am I supposed to think, right? And
Right.
even the fact that, like, I reached out to them on numerous occasions, and you know, you would think that the detectives that are working there right now would have at least wanted to have a conversation with me just to know, like, what did Ridgway say to you, right? But they just brushed me off every single time.
Right.
And
Yeah,
the
you
only
had more
people,
conversations with Ridgway than anyone, probably.
yeah, and they didn't want to talk to me. And I just found that odd. Like, you know, he could be like, he's like your main suspect in these like cold cases, and you don't want to talk to me and maybe try to piece something together. Like, maybe there's something that he wrote to me that I don't know could be helpful, right, in solving a case. And like, if we put all of our brains together, we could figure something out,
And
right?
that's such a good point too, that I mean, it's not only the phone calls, it's the amount of letters that he sent to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, even started out your relationship with asking you about these unsolved cases, right?
Right.
And you put it in the book too, where he says that there's this whole bit about how he was alleging that someone was dumping bodies in his area where he disposed bodies.
Right. He kept questioning me. Like, how can there be another serial killer putting bodies? Because at the time, and I didn't quite understand this, it wasn't until like after, when I started really conducting all this research, that there were stories that came out during the 90s in the media that they suggested, oh, it's another serial killer, don't worry, Green River Killer went away, right? And there were stories written like that because they wanted the public to think that he went away. And I guess not to be afraid, or they didn't want the police to look bad. Maybe it's a combination of all of that, I don't know. But they were trying to say there was another serial killer. And he said, well, how can there be another serial killer putting bodies? Those are my spots. Those are, you know, my dump sites, you know? And I'm like, well, that's true, I guess, right? Unless it's a copycat killer. But even if it was a copycat killer, they wouldn't have all that information because he had not been caught yet, right, in the 90s.
Right.
So yeah, it's hard to say, but you know, Sarah Habakangas, Nicole French, they were two young girls, and they were found within that vicinity in the North Bend area. And that was where he was putting his victims later on. You know, he's putting them further up north. So it you know, it makes sense, you know. And I asked him too, I said, you know, what are you trying to tell me? What does that mean? He said, well, they're all mine. They're all mine then. And I said, well, okay. But then it's like, you know, in order to prove it, you do need help from law enforcement, I feel, right? So it was just
Yeah, that's got to be frustrating. And you know what's kind of funny about that is the with the Long Island serial killer, which is going to come to trial, I believe, this year. When they found the 10 bodies in his dumping site, I had Julia Cali, who used to be a FBI behavioral analyst unit member, has a show, The Consult. I had her on, and I actually posed the question to her. I said, do you believe that all 10 bodies are connected to him? And she was like, well, I'm not sure. I think she said like 6 of them was going to be from him, but she wasn't sure about the others. And sure enough, he actually didn't kill everyone that was found in that dumping ground. So someone found the same remote spot and thought it would be a good idea to dump their bodies there as well.
Wow.
So it does happen.
I guess it does happen. Yeah.
I think in this case with Gary and just the other things that we can align with him, I think he's responsible.
I think so too. I mean, again, both of them, you know, went missing on, you know, it was off of, you know, the Strip, right? That's where he would pick up all of his other victims, literally like the same corner, right? So there were just so many things that they had in common that it, you know, makes me think, like, who else would it be, right? Especially during that time. And you know, in terms of law enforcement, it's been very limited, like what they're willing to do, because former members of the task force, like I have spoken with them, and you know, they've offered some help to me. They're the only ones, but they're all retired, and you know, there's only so much I feel that they could do or would be willing to do at this point, you know.
Right. Yeah,
So,
you really got to get the DA on board or the current detectives.
right. And
Which
yeah, I
maybe
mean,
this book will put some pressure on them. It's going to be out on July 21st. Anywhere where you can get a book, Confessions of the Green River Killer. Make sure that y'all pick that up. And I'm serious. This is something that it needs to stay in the public's eye because case after case is coming out. You still got these victims that need to have some closure. And one of the things that we always say, I actually stole this from a friend of mine, Jason Blair, is that people die twice. They died once during their physical death, and then they die again when they're forgotten.
mm,
And I think that that applies to this case as well. Is
yeah.
that you've got these people's memories that we need to keep them going and keep on moving that needle towards giving them their families some closure.
Absolutely. I think that's extremely important. And especially when we have the technology to do so now, where before we didn't, and there's been so many advancements, that we really could be, trying to get answers and closure for
Oh,
these families.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if anyone don't believe me about Othram, you can get their app and read about these amazing cases that they're doing. It really is incredible. So
Yeah.
that frustrates me because I would love to see how many of these they can knock out. I'm sure if
Right.
we can get them the material, they
Yeah. I
can
mean,
definitely solve it.
that would be amazing. And, but at the same time, too, I wonder if like law enforcement, they also don't want to give him a higher kill count. I think that's part of
Right.
it. I think that's a big part of it,
Maybe they'll wait
because
till do you think it's a ego thing? Like they don't want to give him or is it more political?
it could be a combination of both. I think it very well could be a combination of both. Yeah, I mean, they don't want to give him any more notoriety. I don't think, right? So if, all these cases start to get solved, then he's going to be in the news a lot more and then he has a higher number. But at this point, I'm not even sure, like considering his health, how coherent he actually is at this point, that like, would that even matter to him? Like, I don't know. I haven't spoken with him in a long time. I just know his health has significantly declined. And yeah, I think it's amazing he's even still alive, like knowing what I know, it's kind of, yeah, that blows my mind. But yeah, I mean, so I don't know. I don't know if like it would even matter when it comes to his ego, because considering of how he is right now, just, his physical health.
Right. He's just completely out of it. And
From what I know, yeah, I mean, he can't even walk. I mean, he's in a wheelchair. And he was showing like early signs, I think, of dementia, and he would even tell me that too, that he thought that he had maybe some form of like Alzheimer's, and he was forgetful. And
I was wondering if that was a ploy just to play that game of like, oh, maybe I killed this person, maybe I didn't.
It was all a game.
Bring
It
you
was,
along more, right?
yeah, it was all a game. He wanted to keep me invested, I think. But with him, the thing is, like, you never know. He's a pathological liar who sometimes tells the truth, right? So you never know. So I always took everything that he said with a grain of salt, right? And considered, well, maybe this could be true. And I would try to research as much as I possibly could. But there are some things I think that will just never be completely proven, especially without the help of law enforcement. Like there are women that he mentioned to me that I'm like, okay, I could see this as a real person, but in order to really confirm that this person was real, I would need law enforcement to help me. Like that woman in the hospital that he claimed to have met. If that story is true, I mean, that's a perfect way for him to lure a woman and to like kill her, right? Like, so there's so many things like that I feel like I'll never have the answers to, and I'll never know if, you know, was it a complete lie? Was there some truth to it? Was that the full truth? It's, yeah, that's one of the frustrating things I think with dealing with a serial killer, especially of his caliber, you know?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I would have your publishers send your book to them, and as well as the team there that are investigating this case. And maybe once they read through it, they'll realize just how much work you've done on this case and how much information you have that can still be worked at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. I mean, even the thing he told me about the evidence that he buried, right? The box of evidence, like, you know, that's a possibility. I know some people think he's like full of shit with that, but then I know most of the members of the original task force believed that this box existed just because of the conversations that they had with him about it in 2003. So that raised a lot of questions. Also, the fact that, you know, he's confiding in me about this box, that he always swore to them that he destroyed everything, and they never believed him, and they couldn't get that out of him, that this box of pictures, right, actually existed. And, you know, he started to tell me about that and gave me some hints where it could be. But again, I mean, I dug up like half a park in Seattle. I did. Me and my friend came, and we were out there with shovels, and it's harder than it seems, right? So like, I actually need like solid equipment, and I think I need like a whole team of, you know, stronger men, perhaps, right?
Experts in, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, so there's just, you know, even that, you know, I think that needs to be looked at more closely. And from my understanding, I think there has been some sort of search for that. And that was something, you know, when they brought him back to Seattle.
Right.
And I know that came up, you know, to my understanding, nothing came of it, but that was something that was brought up. So I don't know what effort was really made in trying to find it, but I think a lot of effort should be made in trying to find it.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been so nice if before he went downhill, if you could have sat down with him, you could have done it in the jail, and because they record those conversations.
Yep.
And just to be able to do an interview and have some questions that are prepped by the investigative team or the FBI or whoever to say like, hey, like this is the things that we need to know.
Right.
You more or less work those into the conversation.
Right.
That would have been incredible to do. And something that, right. And you're allowed to visit people. I'm sure he's got restrictions, but they could have made that happen.
Right. And I was on his visiting list. Like, that's the thing. Like, I was already on his visiting list. But the thing is, once he was moved into the infirmary,
right,
that's when it became impossible. They had said, no, it's only for, you know, family. And I would have needed some sort of clearance in order to go there. And they would not provide. I tried so many times, and they just shot me down every time. And I even, you know, got to the point, I called the superintendent. I went to I went through the chain of command, and I literally called this man every day for like a month and a half until he got on the phone with me, because he at first was not taking my calls. And then I finally got him on the phone. I think he realized I'm not giving up. Right. And yeah, I mean, he refused. He said, unless law enforcement accompanies you. And at that point, I mean, it was already over 2 years since Gary had been sick. And, you know, it was just a rapid decline. Like, I think it's just been, you know, he gets worse and worse. And I think, like you said, if it had happened earlier on, like maybe 2022, 2023, when he had first gotten sick, maybe I would have been able to get somewhere with him.
Too bad you couldn't sneak in with a lawyer or something.
Yeah.
Actually, a friend of mine did that to interview Ted Bundy. He was
really
the person that interviewed. Yeah, Mark Pensky is his name. Wow. He's an author in North Carolina and was one of our mentors when we were writing. But he did that, and the guy told him, he said, look, just wear a suit, bring a briefcase, and act professional. And yeah.
This was in the 80s.
Yeah, this is right before he was executed.
I feel it was a different time back then.
Yeah, and he just walked right through security too. Yeah.
I wish I could do that. I
know. If it would have been that easy, I'm sure that you could probably get in there 50 people recovered.
Yeah, I mean, I tried. When I was out there in 2023, I even, I met with one of the former detectives in the task force, and he was all for it. He said, yeah, and he tried to contact the people right now, the detectives who are currently working in King County Sheriff's Office, and he ran it by them and said, hey, she's here, right? And they said no. They did not want me. They said I would have been interfering with their investigation or whatever. So,
well, the good thing about a sheriff's department is sheriffs are elected, and if the public wants you to get involved and they see this book and realize the wealth of knowledge that you have on this case, then maybe there will be some more pressure to get them to cooperate with you.
Yeah, I mean, it would hopefully, because I don't know how much time, nobody knows that, right? How much time he actually has left. I just, I know he's just not in great health. And I know a news story came out back in December that he was receiving end of life care, but I don't think that story was entirely true. I think it was written for sensational purposes, I think. And, because the journalist who had written that story could not confirm any of his sources, right? Like, where is he getting this information? And then Department of Corrections denied it and said, well, there's been no real change in his health. Not that he's healthy, but like, there's been no change, like that he's in like hospice care or anything like that. So, it's hard to say, like, is he like about to die, or is he just like really sick? Like, he's just not improving, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it would be awesome if this book was able to get them to act, and, at least on these couple of cases, that would be great.
How will you handle that when he does passes? Will you go to his funeral or do anything for him?
I don't think I would go to his funeral. I don't even think there would be a funeral, to be honest. But
do you know who would get his body, or would the state just bury it?
I assume it would be his older brother. His older brother and him, they've been in contact. I'm not sure anymore. I think because like his health prevents him from communicating with anyone. Like, he can't physically get to a phone. So, and he can't really write. So he's not communicating, to my understanding, with anyone at this point due to his health. But before this, he did have a relationship with his older brother. So I'm assuming he would be the one in charge of that. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, make sure that you pick up the book, Confessions of the Green River Killer. Maria, you also have a website. Tell us about that.
BeyondTheCrime.com. I haven't posted there in a long time, but you can find conversations that I've had with other people incarcerated for murder, some serial killers. You could find content there as well.
Okay. And where else can we get in touch with you?
I'm on Instagram. So Beyond the Crime. So it's Beyond the Crime. That's my Instagram.
All right. Well, make sure you support Maria and pick up Confessions of the Green River Killer. Again, that's going to be out on July 21st, anywhere where you can buy a book. If you want to support me, you can start off by liking and subscribing to Santana True Crime. You can also pick up my book, A Murder on Campus, The Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. I wrote that with my brother, Dr. Brian Santana. You can find me as well on Instagram and any other social media at Santana True Crime. Maria, thank you so much.
Thank
Make sure you
you.
pick up the book, and good night.
Thank you.